Andrew Loney had said this to us last year, that he'd spoken to former security officers who'd said they told the Queen, and every time someone snitched on Andrew's bad behaviour, that officer was removed or threatened with being removed from his position. So this could be bad news for the legacy of our dear beloved Queen.
Most definitely, and we won't wish to besmirch her memory. There's a few things about Elizabeth. She has been one of our great monarchs. She preserved the institution. Her first prime minister was Winston Churchill. She was a rock star. We loved her. She's not here to defend herself. She's passed. So notwithstanding respect for the dead and acknowledging her legacy, she was the boss of the firm, the CEO. The buck stops with the person at the top. And don't give me this baloney about how she was incredibly old and infirm. The Queen had her intellectual capacities until the very last day of her life.
Picture yourself as the ultimate palace gatekeeper, dressed in somber gray, exhausting every diplomatic maneuver to maintain the crown's dignity. After 16 firm rejections to Prince Andrew, you finally head home convinced you've won the battle, ready to unwind with your drink and dinner. Meanwhile, the Duke of York is already deploying his most devastating tactic: afternoon tea with scones and a mother incapable of refusing him anything. This is UK Unfiltered, your window into the boldest manipulation tactics ever witnessed inside royal walls. Before we explore how Andrew weaponized tea time for tactical victories, please take a second to subscribe and activate notifications. Only a small percentage of viewers have subscribed, and becoming part of our community guarantees you catch every reveal behind the carefully crafted headlines. It costs nothing, supports our channel, and honestly keeps our operation running. Already done? Perfect. Now let's examine the royal who exploited the monarchy as his personal permission dispensary.
It does, absolutely, Emily. I mean, and there are many episodes like that in the book. One that sticks out in my mind, I still think it's one of the most extraordinary episodes of her whole reign, and indeed her whole life, was that terrible morning in 1982 when she woke up to find a strange man at the end of her bed, dripping blood on the floor, holding a smashed ashtray, and she's on her own, and she's pressing the alarm bell and nothing's happening, and she has to keep him talking. It's the Michael Fagan who broke into her bedroom, and I think we've never quite given her, I think, the credit she deserves for that. People just think the whole thing was so sort of bonkers and absurd, and it was almost trivialized in the Netflix series The Crown. But I just think how absolutely terrifying that must have been. And she kept him talking, didn't sort of scream or react or whatever, and was still pressing this bell, thinking, what the hell's going on? I think, mental bubble, I am really going to get...
Royal insider Robert Hardman uncovered Andrew's brilliantly calculated approach to bypassing palace authority, a tactic both elementary and shameless. The prince understood precisely when the Queen's advisors, those protective guardians of her legacy, clocked off for their Sunday break. That narrow window became his strategic opening. With the watchdogs absent, the spoiled prince made his move. He'd casually appear in his mother's private residence for afternoon tea, fully aware no one remained to present opposing viewpoints or inject even minimal common sense into the conversation. Naturally, what crossed the Queen's mind during these sessions?
Well, I was going to say, and a lot of it becomes very relevant for other reasons, and that is what some people have called the Queen's blind spot, which was her, if you like, her favourite son, Andrew.
Well, as I look at in the book, there is this common sort of parlance. People say he was her favourite, and it wasn't quite like that, as I discovered talking to people very close to her. It wasn't so much he was a favourite; he was the one she was really worried about. It wasn't so much favouritism as concern. She could see he was vulnerable. He was a pretty lost soul. He came out of the Navy in 2001. She and her staff tried to get the Navy to keep him on in some capacity, and they'd finally run out of road and said, look, there really is nothing for him to do. And that is when the Tony Blair government in 2001, nudged by a certain Peter Mandelson, said, let's make him a trade envoy. And that's when I think really the sort of trouble started. And he was given a pretty long leash and would go off on these fairly dubious trade missions. And people were reluctant to sort of rein him in and tell him what to do, because I think people thought that he's the Queen's son, and
Did she feel sorry for her own son?
I think she did feel sorry for him at times. Yeah, I mean, I think she was exasperated by some of his behaviour, and there was some pretty appalling behaviour along the way, and people would sometimes try and shield it from her, feeling that, we don't want to upset the Queen, we better not tell her what he's just done. She would always find out. I mean, she was very, very astute. She knew exactly what was going on around the place, and she was not blind to his faults, but at the same time, I think she always had a strong degree of sympathy with what Prince Harry has called the spare, the next one down, the one who's not going to inherit, because her father was a spare, her sister Margaret was a spare, Andrew was a spare, Harry was a spare, and she could see that for the eldest, the heir, you get everything runs on very straight lines. For number two children, it's a very different picture.
Yeah.
This mirrored the age-old tactic of teenagers waiting until one parent leaves before approaching the softer touch for forbidden privileges. Andrew mastered the art of portraying palace officials as unreasonably strict, eventually wearing down the late queen through maternal tenderness until she acquiesced. Come Monday, Andrew strutted through corridors, announcing he carried the monarch's explicit approval for precisely what advisors had prohibited. His technique brilliantly demonstrated how to circumvent institutional authority through strategic tea-time diplomacy. What explains Elizabeth II's repeated permissiveness toward this behavior? The answer lies squarely in classic maternal favoritism dynamics.
It was that Andrew wasn't there.
Well, there was never any question of him being there. You know, he's been exiled now, hasn't he? I mean, last year he was, of course, and they seemed to get quite a good balance of using that he and indeed Sarah Ferguson could come to, you know, private, sort of semi-private family occasions, but weren't taking part in any state occasions. The only state occasion he's taken part in since he stepped down was, you know, the Queen and Prince Philip's funeral and the coronation. Now, otherwise, nothing.
In your book, you do talk about the Queen's relationship with her son and how she felt about her son. And this month would be her 100th birthday. And you talk about it in terms of the relationship that they had and how close they were and how she felt about her son, especially with developments in the latter stages of her life.
Well, what was interesting was that Lord Mountbatten used to go around saying the reason that there was a 10-year gap between Prince Charles and Princess Anne.
While Princess Anne worked relentlessly and received the Queen's worried attention for overexertion, her concerns about Andrew followed an entirely different pattern. Hardman characterizes him as stubbornly independent yet dangerously susceptible to influence. He represented the energetic, unrefined product of her later years, never absorbing fundamental concepts of appropriate conduct. Naval service provided temporary structure since helicopter piloting was apparently his singular competency. However, by 2001, even military leadership exhausted their patience with his recklessness. He embodied chaos in an institution fundamentally built on unwavering stability. Everyone recognizes how this narrative concludes. The catastrophic 2019 television appearance, the Epstein associations casting permanent shadows, culminating in King Charles finally removing his remaining royal distinctions in late 2025.
I'll also talk about Andrew, because obviously, you know, not only has it been a huge story, but there's also a feeling growing, I think, that actually the reputation of the Queen and the way that people view the Queen could actually be under a little bit of pressure as time goes on into the future, and we learn more about how Andrew got his trade envoy job and, you know, exactly how it took so long before he eventually lost everything. Now, we've had polling out just this week saying actually people still love the Queen. She has not reduced in popularity at all. She is as adored now as she has ever been. But let's talk a little bit about what you've got in the book about Andrew, because again, there's actually really some quite big revelation on stories that has been so thoroughly reported and so thoroughly covered. You still have some big revelations. For example, that the whole of Royal Communications basically told Andrew, don't go ahead with the BBC Newsnight interview in 2019. And you've got a quote saying actually he not only did he disregard them, but he disregarded them because he thought he was better than them.
Yeah, I mean, there was the time of Newsnight, no one was entirely sure what was going on, but it became clear that he was planning some sort of interview. And Royal Communications could see this was Royal Communications, people higher up, I mean, all through the palace could see this was a bad idea, and Andrew was told by his private secretary Amanda Thirsk, don't do this. But he went ahead, and one of the reasons there was a lot of anger, I mean, quite apart from the fact that the things he said effectively sort of blew up his entire sort of public career. I mean, it was a sort of, you know, act of self-immolation. But set all that aside, it was also politically a very heated period.
Andrew's ability to sidestep palace advisors lasted years. Yet ultimately, maternal protection proved powerless against accountability for catastrophic personal failures. Breaking news reveals that according to Robert Hardman's research, Andrew employed tactics both elementary and audaciously clever in their execution. His masterstroke involved recognizing that palace officials safeguarding the Queen's public image departed every Sunday afternoon without fail. That predictable gap created his operational window. With gatekeepers gone, the emboldened prince executed his strategy without interference. He'd materialize in the Queen's personal quarters carrying tea credentials, confident that no dissenting voices remained present to challenge his narrative or introduce rational objections. This paralleled teenagers strategically approaching the lenient parent after removing the strict one from the equation. Andrew perfected portraying advisors as absurdly controlling until the late Queen's maternal instincts overrode institutional wisdom, and she relented. Monday mornings witnessed Andrew strutting victoriously, proclaiming royal authorization for precisely what experts had explicitly forbidden. His approach exemplified masterful institutional bypass through calculated tea-time exploitation.
And through the power of Earl Grey.
The extraordinary announcement from Buckingham Palace late today, Prince Andrew soon no longer a prince. King Charles taking action against his younger brother in the wake of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. James Longman standing by in London.
Prince Andrew will no longer be a prince. The extraordinary announcement tonight from Buckingham Palace pushed out of the royal family over his ties to the late convicted sex predator Jeffrey Epstein. King Charles stripping his brother of all his titles. He will effectively no longer be royal, something that has not happened in more than a century. He's also being kicked out of his royal residence. It's a scandal the palace has not been able to shake.
How long have you known about Andrew and Epstein? Have you asked the police to cover up for Andrew? Have you asked the police to cover up for Andrew?
Just this week, the king heckled over it. Late today, the palace releasing a 3-paragraph statement saying the king initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew, adding the prince will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The palace saying formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease on Royal Lodge, where Andrew has lived for more than 20 years. The palace statement ending, these censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. Andrew once hosted Epstein, Harvey Weinstein and Ghislaine Maxwell at that sprawling 30-bedroom mansion, seen here at an 18th birthday party for Andrew's daughter Beatrice in 2006. The Epstein scandal raging for years, with Virginia Giuffre alleging Epstein trafficked her for sex with Andrew.
He knows exactly what he's done.
A claim he denies.
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady.
This, the notorious photo, the soon-to-be former prince with Giuffre at Maxwell's home, presented to him in this infamous 2019 interview, which backfired spectacularly.
She was very specific about that night. She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating, and that she went on to have a bath, possibly.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time.
Andrew claimed that photo was fake. Giuffre ended her life in April, but her recent memoir refocused attention on the case. In a statement tonight, her family saying, today, an ordinary American girl from an ordinary American family brought down a British prince with her truth and extraordinary courage, adding, today she declares victory. We, her family, along with her survivor sisters, continue Virginia's battle.
Breaking developments show Andrew's Sunday tea-time manipulation wasn't his only method for navigating palace resistance. Occasionally, situations escalated to outright physical confrontation, beyond merely circumventing regulations. Prepare yourself for the revelation about when he allegedly replaced diplomatic discussion with actual violence. Robert Hardman exposed an alarming confrontation where Andrew completely lost composure with one of the palace's most respected administrators, Vice Admiral Tony John Stonebert. The master of the household essentially orchestrates all palace operations, making his role absolutely critical. When Stonebert informed Andrew that every available room was already reserved for an approaching banquet, the prince categorically refused to accept this logistical reality. This represented textbook entitled behavior, a surely you recognize my status moment, that deteriorated rapidly beyond control. As tensions mounted, Andrew reportedly delivered what witnesses characterized as a kinetic blow against the vice admiral. Translated plainly, the prince apparently physically struck a senior staff member purely because party accommodations weren't rearranged to satisfy his demands. Consequences arrived swiftly and demonstrated exactly how thoroughly exhausted the family had become with tolerating his conduct. Stonebert reported this assault directly to the Lord Chamberlain, who immediately escalated matters to ultimate authority. King Charles, still Prince of Wales then, personally confronted his brother about the inexcusable behavior. True to form rather than expressing authentic remorse, Andrew attacked those reporting his misconduct, accusing the Lord Chamberlain of manufacturing unnecessary drama. Toxicity escalated until even Prince Philip determined intervention was necessary. The notoriously direct Duke, despite his own bluntness, maintained profound respect for household staff and personally authored an apology letter to the injured party. Andrew's supposed apology emerged as transparently insincere, confirming that even physical altercations couldn't inspire genuine humility. With Thames Valley Police actively investigating his financial connections to Jeffrey Epstein and his royal privileges now permanently revoked, this violent history proves the palace recognized long ago that their favored son had transformed into a liability they could no longer justify protecting. Appreciate you watching.